Okay, welcome back to Tom's Datsun Garage. Today's the day. We're finally going to put the suspension underneath Project Z so that we can get it sitting on its wheels and tires again. Now, I have everything laid out that I need, the hardware and so forth, and I even have my shop manual here for the car. I'm going to go bring you in a lot closer and explain to you what's here and what's going to happen, and then we'll climb underneath the car and start putting it on. Alright, let's start where it all needs to bolt to, and that's going to be the front cross member. So here's the one that I had showed you in a previous video from Techno Toy Tuning, and the hardware to hold it to the chassis is slightly different than what Nissan used to hold the original one to the chassis, which was this piece here. So this is the original cross member from this car. This piece here sits directly flush up against the frame rail of the car, and then the frame rail goes there, and then this piece goes up here, right here, and then this piece goes on the bottom. Well, you can see here where it was. That's the outline of it, like that. And everything gets sandwiched together with this hardware. So this hardware is a little different, as in it has less washers. Instead of using a lock washer and another flat washer and then the nut, it uses a lock nut and one flat washer. So that's exactly how I'm going to install it using their hardware, because this is, at the end of the day, their cross member. And I did all, have all this plated to the proper color. And these were replated also in their proper colors. I'll put up a picture on the screen of these before they were replated so that you can see. So I'm going to climb up under the car, and we're going to get this mounted up to the bottom, and then we'll move on to the steering rack. We'll bolt the steering rack in place using their hardware, because it's stainless and fits right in with the pieces that they provide here. We'll then move on to the lower control arms. We'll get those installed using, once again, their hardware to secure it to the cross member. Then we'll move on to getting the actual coilovers mounted in using the original hardware. The difference with the coilovers today, though, if memory serves, there used to be a thin red paper gasket that was shaped just so to go around this whole thing, and that went between this metal and the body, where it mounts up into there, and it protected, I guess, from scuffing. I couldn't find those, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make my own gasket using gasket material to replicate the same piece. It'll be slightly different in appearance, but functionally the same. Then, after that, we'll attach the steering knuckles using their hardware, because this has the roll center adjusters. We'll attach that to the bottom of the strut housings. Then once all that's in place, we'll get the outer tie rod ends installed. And then the very last piece we're going to put on is going to be the front sway bar. I'll be remiss if I didn't mention the tension control rods. Those will also be installed right around the same exact time as the lower control arms, because they basically bolt right to those. So that's an outline of what we're going to cover today. And if you need to refer to any torque specs or anything like that, some of the Techno Toy Tuning items actually will have torque specs engraved on them, as well as left and right sides engraved on them. So pay attention to that, because for the most part, they don't come with any kind of instructions Most of it is self-explanatory, but it is just something to worth note. Have yourself a service manual on hand, and you'll have the torque specs you need should you desire to use them. And that's enough yapping. Time to put you guys on the stand and time to get installing. Climb up underneath the car. I've got my cross member protected by a towel, and I've got a couple of pieces of lumber stacked on top of my floor jack in order to get this up to the right height. First things first, take the top piece, and the two bumps are going to be facing the car like this, and you can tell this was on the top by the tops of the bolt heads that had previously made markings. There was no washer on there. It was just like that. Okay, so drop both of your mounting bolts in and drop it down through the body of the car like so. All right, I've already done the other side, so now I'm going to get this lifted into place. Then we're going to follow it up with this piece. We're going to sandwich it on the bottom in there, followed by a washer and the supplied lock nut. Bit of a revelation here. So it appears that this piece does not fit inside the new cross member like it used to on the factory original one. And I suspect maybe they did that because their cross member uses a thicker metal. I'm gonna pull this back down and see if there's any adjustments I can make, or if there's anything indeed that I can do to get this to fit. So a bit of a close-up on that one. So this is the driver's side. This is the side where it wouldn't fit up in there. Turns out this piece, the factory, not the factory piece, but the new cross member, is a little bit tighter of a fit than on one side than the passenger side, because I could take it and drop it right into place on the passenger side. This was a tight fit. So just a manufacturing variance of the new cross member. Continuing on, I'm going to put it up into the car now. Bolts down through the top. I've got that flat piece in, flat washer, 17mm lock nut on the bottom. All right, now for the other side. Okay, very cool. Now let me show you a close-up of what this looks like. So you've got your two top 14mm. You have your top plate piece sandwiching in with the bottom piece right here, and then your 17mm nuts, and then underneath that is your washer, your flat washer. Flat washer will be right here, and 17mm. So everything is sandwiched together. So now we have the main cross member in the front installed, and we're ready to go ahead and move on to lower control arms next. Okay, next is the lower control arms. Again, I'm going to use their supplied hardware, but I had it replated, of course, like everything else, to make it appear OEM. So how this is going to work, There's no bushings anymore for the lower control arms. There's this pillow ball joint, which means it can swivel all over the place. You don't have to worry about binding up any bushings or anything like that by tightening it up here too much and then letting it down and then potentially having a problem with your bushings. This is going to be where you can just lock it down and leave it because it's going to pivot no matter what, and there's no rubber bushing inside of this anymore. The top of this bolt is a 22 millimeter head, and the nut is a 21 millimeter, and the bolt goes in from the front side. And that's going to need to be spread just a little bit. If anybody at Techno Toy Tuning is watching this video, guys, do better. So this cross member was too narrow for the lower control arms to go in, so I had to actually spread the driver's side quite a bit to get it to go in, and the passenger side looks like it's going to drop in relatively easy. This is also the same side I had to struggle to get that flat piece on the bottom inside there, and I had to tap down into place. So that tells me this piece may be too narrow, or maybe was welded together too narrow. I'm not entirely sure, but there's definitely a difference on this side, on the driver's side, compared to the passenger side, because I could drop that reinforcement piece right in on that side, and the lower control arm will probably slide right in on that side compared to the driver's side here. So any of you following along at home with your own Techno Toy tuning installation, good luck. I got it spread apart enough, but it was quite a bit of faffing about to do so. I had to use a couple of blocks of wood, a rag, a shop rag, towel to protect the metal finish, and my trusty adjustable pliers to grab onto the ears and spread them apart a little bit, as well as using a pry bar and some wood to get in here and spread it apart, and my lady finger is what this is called, type pry bar to align with this tapered end the holes of the lower control arm up to the holes inside the cross member here where it bolts through. And I've almost got this side lined up enough to get through. I've got the bolt started on this side. The bolt goes in from the front and faces the rear, and the nut is, and the lock washer is going to go in on the rear here. So I'm going to wrestle this in the rest of the way, and then we'll go on to the passenger side. Lock washer and 21 millimeter nut. And remember, you can tighten this all the way because there's no bushing here to worry about anymore. Okay, here we go. Lower control arm mounted. Now I'm going to bring you on over to the passenger side, and we'll do the same exact thing over there, except probably not wrestle it as much to get it in here. All right, passenger side, lower control arm installation. Looks like it's going to be a little more straightforward. I'm not going to have to spread this one much. Use my lady finger and just kind of tweak it just a little bit. Okay. This side's going to look like it's going to need some spreading too. So I'm going to get the tools for that and make that happen. To be fair, aftermarket parts usually require a little bit of tweaking to go on. It's kind of just goes along with the with the territory. All right, let's see if I can get some leverage and some power on that. And do a little more. Go to the back one. Okay. All right, that's a little bit better. Gonna need to go a little more. Okay. All right, let's get some tap action. Put my dead blow hammer on here. Still need to go out a little more. There we go. The rag protects the finish. Oh yeah. There we go. All right, where's my bolt? Flat washer and head of the bolt again from the front. Tap it through. Block washer and nut. Okay, there we go. All right, so later on, I'm going to make sure that these have the paint markings on them, but not until way later. All right. Lower control arm installed on both sides. Now, let's see. I think next, before we put the coilovers in the way, I should probably get this situated here, which is going to be the steering knuckles and the roll center adjusters. Now the roll center adjusters did come with instructions on where to place the bolts for how you want the car to react, and this may be a little bit extreme and unnecessary for a street car that is not slammed into the weeds like mine is going to be just a street car. But I put them on here for maximum adjustability later on in case I wanted to run a track day or something like that, and I felt like I needed a little more extra adjustment, which is the whole point of all this stuff, strength and adjustment, so that I can fine tune exactly how I want this car to drive and tire wear. So these parts are marked. They're stamped with an R for right, L for left, and it's also marked with a little thing out here that says outside or out, meaning this faces outside like this. And this piece here is what bolts to your ball joint, okay? And then this piece will sit on top of that, like this. And then there'll be two really long bolts that go through here that go through that too, and all the way up into the bottom of the strut or coilover. But it's easier to deal with these now instead of putting the strut here in the way and then having to fight for space to work. So I'm going to take care of these right now. Again, these are marked with a R for right hand, and they're marked with a L for left hand. And the way this sits in the car is the taper will sit right down on the taper of this ball joint, and you can see that. So where it says T3, you want it to face down. So that it fits against the taper like that. And you put on your nut. And we're going to tighten this down pretty tight. And then we'll put through our cotter pin. That is also supplied with everything. And then once that's in place, then we'll put in our roll center adjusters. And I'll go over the centering of that when it's time. So that way you can see like where I'm going to set everything up. But for right now, let's get these tightened up really good. .22 millimeter, by the way. I'm gonna definitely need some more torque than that. So let me get me a socket. Okay, so now I've got the nut pretty darn tight with my impact gun, and I lined up the slot in the castle nut to the hole inside the top of the ball joint bevel. And now I've got the cotter pin slid through there and bent into place, but there's very limited real estate on this side, so you got to make sure that you recess it enough into that nut that you can get your roll center adjuster installed without it interfering, like that. Nice. All right. So now we're going to go over the settings for this in just a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and get the tension control rods installed for these right here. And then after that, we can finally put the strut in and get it bolted up. I'll bring you in for a closer look. So with these Acumen adjustment pieces, they also can adjust what's called roll center. Now that happens on cars that are typically lowered. That is something that helps with bump steer, is this spacer here. So that's where I'm going to start. So that gives you instructions. I'm going to use the regular roll center adjustment position, which is these two holes here. And they're supplied extra long bolts with lock nuts. I will go in through the bottom here, like that, and then bolt into the bottoms of the strut itself, the strut housing. So just like similar to the factory. So they'll be like this. If your car isn't slammed into the weeds and you're not tracking it, this is the position that I would start with. So I will drive it like this and start with this just to see how it does. And if I feel like I need to use any of the other positions or hardware for the other settings, I could do so if I feel like it. Okay, so now that I've got that all situated, I'm going to go ahead and get the, let's bolt this in. Let's bolt these tension control rods in next. And then once they're in, I'll go ahead and put the strut in and we'll bolt them in. So the tension control rods they're marked and stamped right and left, so R and L. This is the passenger side, of course, so these are 17mm headed through bolts and lock nuts that go through the lower control arm and through the lower ball joint. Those came in the lower control arms when I bought them. So those are 17mm. This is a 24mm, and this piece here will sandwich, these two pieces will sandwich the factory mount location for the tension control rods. So I'll get those installed and we'll adjust length later, but these will go through here and this will go through here. And I'll sandwich it all together, and then we'll worry about the overall length of it later. Trying to do this without blocking your view, but it's kind of awkward working that way. So I'm gonna kind of lay on the ground. Don't worry, I swept the crap out of this shop before I lay on the ground. My floor is actually very clean. I didn't expect that. So the inboard one is so recessed into the piece here that you can't get your wrench on it. So this may wind up being a 2-socket ordeal. One inside of here and one on the back side. That's interesting. Okay. I'm definitely going to need to lengthen that some. For sure. Alright, it's finally time to get the strut coilover assembly in place. And these will go up through the bottom. And the heads on these is these are 19mm. Okay, so you're gonna need a 19mm socket to get those tightened up. That's a 24. I'd already gone over that, 24 all the way around, and then these are 17s down here. All right, so let me get you a different vantage point. And we'll go ahead and start by installing the top 3 retaining nuts and the strut tower top, the strut tower brace top that's going to go there as well. Before I install the coilover assembly into the car, I just wanted to let you know about that gasket that I was telling you about earlier. I went ahead and made one out of just plain gasket material, and this is, the original one was thinner and it was made of like a red paper, if memory serves. This is only slightly thicker, and but it'll serve the same purpose as the original, which I somehow remember in there. And what I did was I made one And then I drew its pattern, traced its pattern out, and I'll be cutting these out for the other ones. So just a regular plain sheet of gasket material that I got off of Amazon. And this will go in between here and the body of the car. It's not the correct color, but it should serve the exact and correct function. All right, now it's time for installing the strut assembly, and these are 14 millimeter and then lock washers that are going to go here. And before I put those on, the studs will stick up through here, and then I'm going to put the strut tower brace mount on top of it, followed by the washer and the nut. And then the strut will just hang, and then we'll attach the bottom. So I've run into an interesting issue, is that the studs are not long enough on the original factory strut mount tops to allow for the lock washer to go in there and for the strut tower brace mount to go in there also. So I'll forego the lock washers and put just the nuts on, and voila, that'll hold it in place. And you want to make sure this piece is towards the back of the car, because of the way the front end of the car slants. This is the highest part, so it has to clear the hood when the hood closes. So just remember that. All right, now we're finally going to put the bottoms of the struts onto the roll center adjuster. And remember, these are 19 millimeters. You're going to go in through the bottom. In this piece here, we'll go right into this recessed area on the bottom of the strut housing, and then we'll just bolt them up. You may need to fiddle with it just a bit to get it to line up. Memory serves, I had a bit of trouble doing this years ago when I replaced my knuckles with the Nismo or factory short steering knuckles, the quick steering knuckles, which I still have. I'm gonna move the camber to the negative position a little bit, and that ought to free up some adjustment for me to be able to bolt this up a little easier. Okay, that's close enough to that lower control arm. Well, it's going to be a little bit tight to get that started. The angle looks good, so I'll use a 19 millimeter wrench and get it started. Okay. It's started. Let's get the back one started. Oh, I see. So there's a little interference between the adjuster, the roll center adjuster, and the tension control rod mount. Probably because the suspension isn't loaded. So if this was up more, this would clear it more. Okay, that's interesting. Live and learn, I guess. I have these bolts started and well on their way to being tightened, but it's already resting on the the metal back there. So I think what I'm gonna do is tighten these up with the weight on the wheels. I'll get those tightened up the rest of the way with the weight on the wheels, because there's too much interference here for the time being. So looks like that's about all I'm going to do at the moment. If I try to lift this up now, well, you know what? I have a coilover. I have a coilover. Duh. I can lower this thing as much as I need. A little more clearance. There we go. All right. So there's a little bit of interference there, but to take the tension off of everything, and I'm just gonna put this coilover up. I'm not gonna give it any preload or anything like that, but I'm just gonna put the coilover up. Not really going to crank it down. There we go. All right, so that is this side installed. Sorry for the terrible camera work, folks. I had to paint those so that they looked nice. Now the interference is coming on the back side over here. So I'll show you. This is where the interference is. Right here. Between these two parts here. But if the car is low enough or on the ground under its own weight, it's not a problem. But you back off the tension on the coilovers and you can raise this whole thing up enough or push it up enough to get everything to tighten up like it's supposed to. So this side's installed. Now I'm going to move over to the driver's side. Install the driver's side. It's basically rinse and repeat. So I don't know if I need to put you through that for the driver's side. There will be black caps that attach up here. They just clip into place. I still have them. And that's the adjuster for the strut for adjusting the Johnson rebound, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah. All right. Nope, that's not a scratch. Now it's time to get this side done. So we'll get this side installed, and then it'll be time to move on to the steering rack and tie rod ends after that. And voila, driver's side's done. It was the same thing as the passenger side, so I just went ahead and did that off camera. I'm sure most of you won't mind. Same exact thing. So this was where the cross brace is going to go for the strut tower brace down the road. So now it's finally time to install the steering rack. I got the upgraded steering rack from Techno Toy Tuning, as well as their aluminum retainers that clamp it down, and that came with its own hardware. I've got the outer tie rod ends and the hardware for that. I'm going to go over how to set that up and which hole to use for what reason. And I'm gonna have to put this on the stand and hit record again. The steering rack will be pretty straightforward. It just pretty much drops down onto these perches here on the cross member, and then these top clamps fit over top and get bolted down from underneath with these 6mm Allen headed. It's a 6mm Allen key. It goes in to these recesses right here. So I'll go in from underneath like that and clamp everything together. Pretty straightforward. Huh. It's a lot more difficult than I anticipated. I wonder what's going on. I think I got one started. All right. Passenger side, 2 of them are started. I just gotta get the driver's side clamp on and then run it on down. This does not make for exciting video. It definitely does not make for exciting video, but you get the idea. So I'm going to wrestle these in the rest of the way, and then I'll start recording again afterwards. So it appears that the standoffs here, the brackets, were not welded in place properly. I don't know if it shows up on camera, but basically it looks like it's sitting on these a bit off, like almost like either these pieces on the rack were too far apart or these pieces were too close together before they were welded on. I'm going to see if I can make any kind of adjustments on this and then get them to sit right, and then clamp them down. But definitely, so far I'm thinking they need to do better. Dropping the upgraded steering rack onto the original front cross member, it actually dropped right in place and lines right up. So that tells me 100% it's not the rack, but it's the new cross member that is slightly wonky. So that confirms it. I'm going to see what I can do to adjust the ears on this. I have to spread them apart just a little bit to get the rack to drop on enough to screw it down into place. So that's what I'm going to work on next. All right, I've come to the conclusion I am not going to be able to install this rack onto this cross member. And I took a tape measure, and if I run it across center to center, it's right around exactly 10 inches from center to center on this back tube. If I take it and go to the front, center to center, it's about 1/8 of an inch wider in the front. And when I look, if I rotate the rack down, that 1/8 of an inch makes quite a difference. The front pretty much lines up right in here, but the back is too tight. And because of that, and the way this is all welded together, there's actually no way I'll be able to move these further apart in the back where I need it to be in order to put the rack on. So this is going to be a phone call and an email to Techno Toy Tuning tomorrow, Monday, and see if they can make another one and send it out to me, because there's no way I'm going to be able to do this, unfortunately. So instead of continuing on with the rest of the front suspension, it's pretty much fruitless at this point. Because of this, I'm going to go ahead and start on the rear suspension. But for that, you're going to have to wait for the next video. What a complete and utter disappointment. So much for getting my car all finished before the end of the year and being a roller. It is now the next day. It is Sunday, the 21st of December. So today's the winter solstice, shortest day of the year. And even if I get in touch with Techno Toy Tuning tomorrow, there's no way they're going to have a crossmember made for me and powder coated and sent to me in any quick amount of time for me to be able to finish this before the end of the year. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start on the rear suspension and hope I don't run into any problems there. What else can I do at this point, really? I'm going to take a few pictures of the measurements and take a picture of the rack sitting in it, so forth, so that I could show them tomorrow when they open that what's going on. And hopefully, and I'm pretty sure they'll be a pretty stand-up company. They've been good so far, so I have no reason to believe I'll get any pushback for something that's that blatant. So the next video, I'm going to be doing the rear suspension, and then I'll just have to keep you all informed on what's going on with the front suspension when that comes in, or the cross member when that comes in, because at that point it's just put the rack in, set the tie rod ends, and then put the sway bar in, and that's it. Then the front suspension will be done. I can put the wheels on it and move on to the back, but I'm going to move on to the back anyway because I need this car to be put together. I miss it dearly. Anywho, sorry about the disappointment on this video. Believe me, nobody's more disappointed than I am right now. But anyway, thanks for watching.